Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. And I wanted to make this week's video because it was kind of inspired by the fact that I just signed up to take Immediate Action Combatives seminar that Cecil Birch is going to be putting on in Austin in August, so here in a couple months. And it's not specifically about that, but it's about a conversation that tends to be had around courses like that, whether it is somebody that's just getting into Jiu Jitsu or whether somebody is debating on signing up for one of Cecil's classes or one of the other ShivWorks classes like ECQC. And what you tend to hear a lot in the online discussions of those is, oh, well, I want to make sure that I insert rationale here. And generally it is one of a couple things. Like, I either need to get in better shape first, or I want to have some working knowledge of combatives first before I get into it. And I understand the sentiment, but I very strongly disagree with it. Here's why. Couple things. I mean, number one, there's arguments to be made that if you have a working understanding of the terminology being used and the methods being taught, then that will facilitate your learning. That's true to a degree, but more often than not, what I suspect, and this is not trying to call out anybody in particular, so if this applies to you, please don't take it as an attack. But generally when I hear stuff like that, what it says to me is, I recognize and I acknowledge that I'm deficient in this area. And so what I want to do is build up in that area before I go take training, partially so that I get the most out of the curriculum, but also so that I'm less prone to embarrassing myself. And I mean, there's certainly nothing wrong with wanting to make sure that you maximize your training time and that you're getting the most out of a class. But here's the thing. Don't you owe it to yourself to know what your actual performance is at your default setting right now? Because, you know, we don't get to pick the day. And so, at least for me personally, I would rather know right now where my shit falls apart so that I can factor that into my decision making, and after that work on improving the areas where I'm weaker, as opposed to, well, I know I suck in this area, but I'm not sure exactly how bad I suck, so let me work to suck less in this area before I figure out where my gaps actually. It seems backwards to me, and it really seems detrimental. Setting aside the ego preservation, because you can argue that, you know, all day long, and while I might not necessarily agree with that thinking, I can certainly understand it. But think about it this way. You're at where you're at right now at this point in time. And if your worst day ends up being tomorrow, that's not the time to figure out where you're coming up short, what your strong suits are, and how to factor that into your total defensive plan. I would argue that you owe it to yourself and to the people, you know, whose responsibility you're in charge of, whose security that you're in charge of. Family, kids, whomever, you know, you choose to kind of put under your purview, that you know, you owe it to all those people to be able to factor in your weaknesses now. So don't wait. You know, I took ECQC at arguably my fattest and most out of shape, and honestly, this rash guard is doing me some favors. But I mean, right now I'm walking around at, you know, a squishy 228-ish, depending on the day. So this will be my second time taking that class from Cecil, and I'm curious to see how I've progressed, because the first time I took it, it was after ECQC and maybe about 6 months worth of Jiu Jitsu. Now at this point I've got a couple of years of Jiu Jitsu under my belt, still just a 2-stripe white belt, but I'm curious to see how, you know, how my understanding of the material has changed. So That's the challenge that I'm going to put out to you. I don't care what it is, whether it's a combatives class like this or like ECQC, whether it is just getting into a either Jiu Jitsu or boxing or Muay Thai gym or whatever. Do it now, because that's the fastest way to start filling in the gaps. If you're resistant to it, that means that you know that you're weak in that area. Would you rather start reinforcing it with professional direction or try and kind of figure it out on your own first? So just some food for thought, and hopefully I will see some of you guys in Austin coming up here in a couple months. So aside from that, hope everybody has a fantastic week. Stay dangerous and stay sharp.